So we want to take a second to introduce the esteemed members of our panel. We're going to start on the outside with Mr. Jacob Bender, who is the Executive Director of CARE Philadelphia. And next to him is Aliyah Kabir, the CEO of AZK Communications. And to her left is Dr. Khalid Blankenship of the Department of Religion at Temple University. And on the end, we have Zakiya Matthews, an executive producer at FiOS One in New York and New Jersey.
So let's get started with stereotypes. You know, that's a hot, interesting thing. I did a Facebook poll, and I found some interesting stereotypes about Muslims out there. One of them is that all Muslim women wear hijabs. Islam breeds hate towards other religions. Muslim women are submissive. The Nation of Islam are black supremacists. Muslims do not believe in Jesus. Muslims are only black and Arab.
Wow.
If you eat pork, you're gonna die. So give us a rating of the media of how they're portraying Muslims, and give us a grade on that. What do you think about that? Have you heard of any other stereotypes you'd like to share?
D minus for the media. In presenting information about Muslims, they rely on so-called experts who have an agenda which is fundamentally anti-Islamic. And it presents, stereotypes come from information that people get off the media. It doesn't evolve by itself. And unless we change the picture of Muslims and of Islam in the media itself, the stereotypes won't go away.
All right, D minus for him. All right, what about you, Aliyah?
The question for me is a little bit deeper than that. I took it as and divided into three different categories: from the national media, the international media, and the local media. Nationally, straight out F, flat out F, they are failing the Muslims, and they are failing the country because the national media is designed to be anti-Islamic, anti-Muslim. It's our turn now to be the hated ones. It is always has been a tradition in this country for this country to select someone to blame, whether it's the Japanese, whether it was black people, whether it's the immigrants, whether it's women, it's somebody to blame, and now it's the Muslims. So for that, flat out F. Internationally, I had a chance to travel to Australia and see the media on that side, particularly when they were reporting on the Syrian refugee situation that's going on now. It's a lot more compassionate. They show a very balanced view of what's going on in that particular situation. It's not all about, these Muslims that are leaving and going into other places and seeking to soak up resources like the national media here in the United States. It is very much compassionate. It's more about the war, what they're trying to escape. So for them, I saw a little bit more compassion. I'll give them a C+. Locally, it's a little bit different. We are in a unique place in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the Mecca of the West. Philadelphia is where all the other Muslims in the United States say all the Muslims are. So here it's a little bit different where we're very grateful to have people like Michael Days as the editor of the Philadelphia Daily News, who picked up the phone and just said, listen, I don't think I have any Muslims in my newsroom, and there's some topics that need to be discussed. Would you mind coming on and helping us with that? Philadelphia is in such a unique place where you have people who recognize that there is 250,000 Muslims here in the Delaware Valley area, and there's a need for people who look like me to tell the story of Muslims. So for that, I would give the local media, because they understand that there's an issue, and they reach out on those three levels of broadcast television, broadcast radio, and print to say, we need some help with this. So for me, it's a B for the local.
Dr. Blankenship?
Well, I think I agree with that mostly. I would like to observe that of the different parts of the elite that are doing different things that the Muslims might consider deleterious and harmful, such as the political establishment, the economic establishment, the military security apparatus and that establishment, and the media. All of those others, well, military security do what military security people do. Economic people do what economic people do. Politicians do what politicians do. But the media are supposed to represent, at least to some extent, the truth, but in fact they operate as an agency of propaganda. Now, I think distinguishing the different levels of media is very crucial, so I agree with that. And furthermore, within the media, one has to distinguish between one individual and another, because some are not as bad as others in this respect. But in general, I agree with giving the national media an F and considering the national media simply to be an instrument of this propaganda of the state. And furthermore, that propaganda is also distorting and false on practically every other issue. There's almost nothing that the media reports honestly in any respect about anything. Economic news, all false. Other foreign news, all false. On Russia and China, all false. Everything they report practically is informed by the political agenda of the 0.0001% who run things. And it is a completely directed propaganda, and I would not say that the TASS news agency in the former Soviet Union in the days of the Cold War would have been any more centrally controlled than the media is here, the national media. And I think that morally, the moral claim against the media and its representatives is greater than the claim against the other representatives of the establishment in the country. And even in the internal politics of the country, you can observe this happening, where you can see that there is a 100% consensus in the media against the candidate Donald Trump, yet he has half of the vote. How is that?
We'll get to Donald Trump, don't worry. Zakia?
Well, I think that a part of the push and pull and the issue is that I think Aaliyah is correct. You definitely have to break it down between international, national, and local. And I think especially on the national level, where I spent the first half of my career, I think they really think they know what they're talking about. And the problem is they don't. They will often have, we're talking about Muslims in the media. So a lot of times my thing with the people who book for the shows, that we have bookers, if you're not familiar with, those are the people who bring on, who are responsible for wrangling the guest onto the various programs. And the problem is they're talking about Muslims in the media. They will have maybe 3 guests in a segment. None of them are Muslim. How are you having that conversation? That conversation is it's completely disrespectful. It shows a lack of wanting to get to the truth. So it's hard for me to listen to criticism about the media. I got into it because I love it and I hated it all at the same time. And I thought the only way to do anything was to become a part of it, right? So, but it's hard not to allow people to have their really harsh criticisms. I understand where they come from, because when you see that, if you're not in a position, everybody's not an executive producer. So they're not gonna listen to the AP who's running copy across the floor when they say, hey, there's no Muslims on your panel or on your segments, and you only talk to Muslims from the Middle East and you never talk to Muslims from other cultures who have completely different perspectives and will give you different answers. And I think a lot of that is the problem. They think that they know what they're talking about, and unfortunately they don't, because they're not even tapping the right resources to even begin to get have the conversation that they need to have.
And Zakia, you work in the newsroom, and Ms. Aaliyah, you are connected to the community. Why do you think, Aaliyah, the Muslims aren't in the normal scope of coverage? Why is it only that during a terror attack or something that happened in Paris or a robbery, Muslims aren't the normal scope of coverage?
Because we're really not seen as part of the American landscape. They don't care anything about us. You know, we're just kind of the annoyance for the moment. Because I am connected with the community, and because of my background in media, I'm able to use those networks and put them together. And often what I find is that because people have already been exposed to so much stereotyping, that's the only time they come to a mosque or seek out, any Muslims where there's some sort of tragedy that's going on and there's a Muslim involved. They don't do that when, a Christian shoots up a movie theater. No one runs down to the church that he belonged to. It's always about the person's religion when it's a Muslim. So my job in the PR industry and my job being connected to the journalists in this community and various other communities is to pitch beyond Ramadan and to pitch beyond, and I can clean up the crisis when things go on the national level or something goes on negatively and there's a Muslim involved. The local media will call me, Aaliyah, who should we talk to? More importantly, who should we not talk to? But my job is to keep us, to continue to pitch positive stories so they have there's no way they can ignore who we really are. So all throughout the year, and some of the journalists here will tell you, I'm in their email boxes. Well, there's a story about this Muslim, or there's a story about, halal products and how they are really affecting our economy, how, manufacturers are making nail polish that are permissible for Muslim women, and, Target is now selling khimars and hijabs. So those are the things where I force them to say, okay, yes, that's a nice story about the terrorists. Mm-hmm. But here's 5 other positive stories, and you're going to pick one to report on. And I think that's my connection between, what I do as a public relations professional in the community that I serve.
Zakia?
I think there are several, or at least 2 things that happen. You have, I'll say it again, people who don't really understand or know where the right resources to tap in the newsroom. And I think when you're in a local newsroom, it's a little easier, especially when you are working directly with your producers, and these people often live in the communities where they're producing or reporting news. It's a lot easier to say, where is the predominantly Turkish, Irish, whatever, Catholic, Muslim, where can we find a concentration so we can go talk to these people and get them involved? And sometimes it is valid to go down to their church or to the masjid, and it doesn't have to be about anything negative. It can certainly be about a product that's available or something. But I think a part of it, when you're pitching those stories, I'm hoping that you're not just pitching, like if it's a woman who opened a business, it doesn't have to be that she is Muslim. Absolutely. Opening a business. She is just a woman who came up with this amazing idea, and she opened a business, and she's Muslim, because what you have to do is just see her as human, right? The khimar, I think one of the things I always have to do when I meet, because I'm not the person who they expect to be in charge, and I'm not the person they expect to see coming in the room. And I think what I try to do is just do what I do, because then I think they realize this is not something that you need to be concerned about, because that's not even what we're here for necessarily. So I think that you have to, in the newsroom, part of the reason why I became a producer and then an executive producer was so that I could have that kind of input. I originally wanted to be a reporter, but then I realized I could actually have more say if I just keep my butt behind the camera. So I decided to do that, and when I'm working with younger producers and reporters, it's a great opportunity to teach them, because if you wait till they get to the national level where it is about a completely different way of covering the news, you've already missed that opportunity to teach them as they're growing and they're getting better. So there's that. The other issue I think sometimes is that possibly because of the negative coverage in the past, or possibly because of cultural reasons, there are times when even when I call the masjid and I give the salams, and they do not want to be on camera. They don't want to talk about it. Even if it's something great, like there's a food truck festival, like in North Jersey, they have a halal food truck festival every year. And even when it's something like that, they're like, nope, don't want to talk to you, click. And that's an issue. You need to, if you're going to have an event, reach out to someone like Aaliyah or myself or someone who you tap your resources, send the emails out so that you can learn to have a relationship with the media that you're comfortable with. But don't always lock them out, because if you don't want them to come around just for the bad stuff, then you need to also invite them because sometimes, Aaliyah, we're just not invited either. And I see it time and time again. They don't want to talk to us. If you're not Muslim, Muslim, they don't want to talk to you. If you're not a certain kind of Muslim, they don't want to talk to you. So there are issues on both sides, if I'm being honest.
And that was going to lead into my next questions. Are Muslims open to media coverage? Does it depend on the locale? I know you said in North Jersey, Philadelphia. Jacob, I know you're with CARE, Dr. Blankenship. What is it like in your instances?
Well, Muslims are usually open to coverage of some kind or other. For example, the other day, I had some students from were working with WHYY came to the mosque where I preach on Friday and taped that. And the mosque community were very welcoming of them and pleased that that happened, and we're not, unhappy, even though the women were not observing the covering up, but they didn't mind that, and because they think that's so important to say something on behalf of Islam. On the other hand, some people might be reticent, especially if they can't speak English well, and often the media have used people who can't speak English well as foils to defame their own religion by baiting them and running circles around them and then identifying them as the foreigners because they speak with a foreign accent. So someone like me, they would never have me on the media, but then that gets into another question about the different kinds of Muslims. Maybe you'll like to discuss that also as we go along.
Sure. Jacob?
The immigrant community, which is part of the broader Muslim community that we serve through the Council on American Islamic Relations, has tended to be in the last couple years, particularly since 9/11, apprehensive about talking to the media, as they are apprehensive about government snooping, government intervention, government harassment. And this comes from the experience of daily lives in the Muslim community. Many Americans who are not Muslim don't realize the extent of fear that is generated in the Muslim community by U.S. government policy abroad and by the so-called war on terror at home. Our lawyer in our office gets at least a dozen calls a month by people reporting that the FBI has come to their front door Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, knocks on the door and says, "You need to talk to us." And sometimes they're so afraid because they come from countries that where civil liberties are not enshrined in law. And here they're facing a virtual inquisition, trying to pry into their lives, using them as surrogate snitches to report on activity in the mosque. And so there's a lot of fear within the American Muslim community, particularly the immigrant part of it, as a result of American policy since 9/11.
I'm glad you touched on fear because that'll lead us into our next topic, which is Islamophobia. Just a quick poll. How many people are afraid of spiders? Just raise your hand. Closed spaces, claustrophobia? Okay. You know, Islamophobia is on that list too. Islamophobia is actually, I found the term phobia in Mayo Clinic online. And phobia, according to the National Institutes of Health, is a type of anxiety disorder. It is a strong, irrational fear of something that poses little or no real danger. There are many specific phobias, like we said, arachnophobia, claustrophobia, fear of closed spaces, and a Gallup poll referenced a rise of Islamophobia after 9/11 attacks. Many Muslims are being unfairly targeted, as Jacob mentioned, and discriminated against because of Islamophobia. Locally, we've seen a pig's head thrown at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in northeast or in the northern part of Philadelphia. And though we don't know why someone with the red pickup truck went to, drop a severed pig's head, we do know that Islamophobia is a part of that. And we do have one clip to show.
Next 4 incidents all happened on Southwest Airlines. On November 18, 2015, 2 Arab passengers were blocked from boarding a flight because another passenger was afraid to fly with them because they spoke Arabic.
I was like, why? He's like, because one of the passenger, he felt not safe flying with you guys.
On the same day, also at Chicago Midway Airport, 6 passengers were removed from a flight because of their behavior. On April 6, 2016, Khairuddin Makhzoumi, an Iraqi student, was removed off of a flight for speaking Arabic during a phone call with his uncle. The FBI came to interrogate him and went as far as to say, "Tell me everything you know about martyrdom." On April 13, 2016, Hakima Abdullah, a Somali woman wearing a hijab, was removed off a flight for switching seats with another passenger. Last December, on American Airlines, 3 South Asian Muslim students and 1 Sikh student was removed from a flight for, wait for this, suspiciously upgrading. It was a flight from Toronto to New York City, and now there's a lawsuit against American Airlines.
So that is flying while Muslim. If you can look up the hashtag, there are many incidents where Muslims were being unfairly targeted, and on airlines would be one of them. So the next time you go on an airline, if you see anything like that, or if you want to talk more about it, you can hashtag flying while Muslim. Jason?
So when we talk about Islamophobia and how it's kind of permeated society, and I've listened to each of you, and all of you have extremely valid points about how our job as media members, in terms of our coverage, in terms of making ourselves more available to the Muslim community, as well as being able to try to get that dialogue going. When you look at Islamophobia, a lot of it comes from that lack of dialogue, where people don't understand what essentially how Muslim Americans are no different from anybody else. It's just a matter of who you worship. And you just look at what's gone on in the last year, where we go back to earlier this year following what occurred in San Bernardino, where there was the rash of governors who were just racing, Republican governors, I should note, who were racing to say, we are going to cut off Syrian refugees, including in my home state, Michigan, our governor, Rick Snyder, he of the wonderful way he's handled Flint, Michigan, took the time to say that they were going to cut off Syrian refugees coming into the state of Michigan, something that they constitutionally can't do anyway. It was a symbolic gesture. Around that same time, 2 Republican presidential candidates, between Donald Trump, who'd already made the Muslim ban statement, and then Ted Cruz going further, saying we should send police into Muslim neighborhoods to almost like keep surveillance, essentially turning neighborhoods into concentration camps. There are statistics showing 52% of students, courtesy of CARE, 52% of students in California have been bullied or taunted because they're Muslim. There was an incident in New York City where a 6th grader was beaten up. She was wearing her hijab, and she was beaten up by 3 boys who were calling her a terrorist and screaming ISIS and ISIL. And when you hear of incidents like these, and I think back to when 9/11 occurred, I was still a student, Michigan State University, and I knew instantly that it was going to be a problem in Dearborn, Michigan, where you have the very large concentration of Muslim Americans. After the Boston bombing, I went to one of the largest mosques in Dearborn, and they were very welcoming, by the way, because they actually appreciated somebody coming in and talking to them and really getting their side of the story. But when you see these issues of Islamophobia, where do you feel that it's rooted? And secondarily, how can I guess it almost be normalization of being a Muslim American?
In my opinion, Islamophobia is based just in hate. There's no miscommunication. There is no, lack of education. There are resources in every state, all over the country. You have an internet. We have websites that you can go to. There are numerous mosques in every city across America where you can go and visit a mosque and talk to Muslims. It is not about lack of communication. It is about people who are determined to hate someone different from them. The people that committed these acts against Muslims on these airlines are already hateful. It really doesn't have anything to, in my opinion, to have to do about fear. I really think Islamophobia is the wrong term to use. This is just about hate. This country has a history, a very well-documented history of treating people that are not white, male, and Protestant Christian differently, hatefully, treating them with disrespect. It has started with Africans as slaves being stripped of their religion and being forced to be Christians. It went all the way through, before that, with Native Americans, the way Native Americans have been treated in this country, and so on and so on. So this is not they fear us because they don't know us. I'm not buying that anymore. 9/11 was 2001.
It's 15 years ago.
Exactly. They have had 15 years to open a book. They have had 15 years to get on the internet, to go meet a Muslim. There are Muslims everywhere, especially here in Philadelphia. There's no one in Philadelphia that can say they haven't crossed paths with a Muslim. So I'm not buying the fear. It's not about fear. It's about people who are determined to hate people and charge people with false crimes and suspicion because they are uncomfortable.
And I see Jacob definitely has something to say too.
Right. A century ago, there was another group in this country that was accused with the same language that Muslims are being accused of today. This group was accused of believing in a religion which was incompatible with democracy. They were accused of being implicitly owing allegiance to a foreign power. They were accused of being implicitly anti-woman. What was that group? American Catholics. American Catholics. And now they're considered part of the mainstream. But 100 years ago, there were signs all over New England that said, no dogs, no Catholics, no Irish need apply. The same level of hate, the same type of hate, part of which I think is due to America has always needed an enemy to justify its military economy, going back to the beginning of this century, of the previous century, when we reached out and became an empire. An empire needs an enemy, and there was a series of enemies that this type of economy produced. When I was growing up, it was American communists who were accused of being disloyal. I remember the FBI coming to my own parents' house when I was 3 years old and asking, do you know so-and-so? Can we look at your library? And my mother crying, saying, no, you can't come in. We have small children. This is part of the story of this country. And unless we realize the level of hate which is instilled to create this type of enemy, we will not be able to change the fundamental nature of this society.
So I think I'm going to keep my response a little more narrow. I think in terms of only Allah can change someone's heart, right? Only your creator, God, whoever you believe, wherever your faith lies, you probably believe that is the only person who can truly change someone's heart. But what we can do as journalists and what you can do as viewers is first of all, diversify your news sources. Don't rely on just one station or one website. Or there's a lot, and in as much as people who are non-Muslim absolutely need to read and study. If you want to know, ask a question, go to the masjid. Most masjids will welcome you. I don't know anyone that would not. However, even as journalists, we also need to do our part. We need to do a little homework. I know we have deadlines. I'm real strict on deadlines. I get really uptight when you miss them. But that being said, you have to give yourself, you must do the work. And part of the work is consider your source once, twice, 3 times, and then do the work, do the background, and figure out what it is, who it is that you're talking to. If you are going to get a soundbite, and sometimes the news lives on sound bites. If you're going to get a sound bite from someone who has no love for Muslims, then you certainly should be balancing that out with someone who has a different opinion. And I think, because if not, all you do is give life to what we're calling Islamophobia, and I agree, it's kind of a weak term for something that is just hatred. But I think that you give it too much energy. The other thing is sometimes we play these images and words have so much power, and we play them over and over and over again. We don't tell the story differently. We don't always look for new angles, and I know in national media, that's a very popular thing. You stay with the one angle, you beat it into the ground, it's running every cycle all day. At some point, somebody has to take a minute, and I know it's a business, but you have to be able to, you have to take a minute and find a new angle so that you're getting a much more panoramic perspective of Islam, and that applies to anything. You need to have a much more panoramic view, and you can only do that by really exploring.
When I relay this back to one of the experiences I had in Michigan, right around, it had to be a few years ago, if you remember, there's this pastor in Florida named Terry Jones. he became a rather normal fixture around Dearborn because his constant protests of the Holy Quran, and he's constantly trying to terrorize mosques as it was even in the local media described it. He was coming in to basically incite and cause problems with people. What level of work do we need to do as journalists? I'm saying as someone who's I've been a journalist since I was in high school. I've been a professional journalist for 12 years. I know that there are things that I can do better, and I've called myself getting to understand all cultures. Mm-hmm. And there are other journalists in this room and who feel the same way. When you see people like Terry Jones, who look to incite, who look to cause problems, who look to try to spur trouble, including trying to burn a Quran, where obviously it would be a huge issue if a Muslim church or a group of Muslims decided they wanted to burn a Bible. Mm-hmm. How can we as journalists balance this out? What can we do? Because in our newsrooms, as you've mentioned, sometimes it's that guy's there, we got to get a camera in front of him. Mm-hmm. We got to get a mic in front of him, even if it doesn't make any sense and it's just spurring it on. What should we do in terms of either balancing it out or trying to change that culture, change that idea?
I think one thing we need to do is we have to ask the right questions, right? We went into an entire military conflict in the Middle East because no one in our government asked the right questions. Everybody took what someone told them in a report, and they kind of just went with it, right? There was no real evidence of weapons of mass destruction, but we thought, you know what? For whatever, we know there are all these other motives and other things at work, but if you just take that on face value, we see what happens when no one will take a minute or be strong enough to say, I'm gonna ask the hard questions. And when I think you do have to put someone like him on TV. I don't think you put him on TV or radio or in print. I don't think you put him on all day, every day. But I think part of the reason is, first of all, if I live in that community, I want to know that guy's there. I really kind of want to know he's out there. I need to watch my back. But at the same time, I think that what you do is the person that you put on that story needs to be someone who can handle that interview, because that person needs to ask him the questions, and he will. An ignorant person will show their own ignorance. They can't help it, right? They exude it to a certain extent. So if you ask them the right questions and you ask them what is that based in, you're going to find that if they're putting out something that's false, you're going to find that they don't really know what they're talking about. And and what we should do then is we need to say that in the report. We need to balance it out by saying, he said that Muslims hate Jesus. But in fact, that is not true. We need to be really clear. We can't leave it hanging. We can't let his soundbite exist without now qualifying that and balancing that with what is actually the case. That's one very simple day-to-day way that you can do that.
I think Dr. Blankenship.
Well, I think that it's necessary to correctly analyze how things really are and to try to bring back the media discourses to something closer to approximating reality, because they're way off in Never Never Land. And there are many things that are not admitted here at all. So, for example, when we talk about Islamophobia, even fear of Islam, well, it's not a fear of every Muslim, though, because everything in the United States is refracted through the lens of race. So it is certain groups that are picked on, principally Arabs, people who look like Arabs, and neglecting the ones who don't, may also be Arabs but don't look like Arabs, and South Asians in particular. People who are Turco-Iranian, maybe not so much because they're up in the areas that are a little whiter, and Southeast Asians, Indonesians, and Malaysians, who are almost a sixth of the Muslims. Nobody even knows they exist. And then African Muslims, people who come as immigrants, I mean recently from West Africa and so on. Well, they're just blacks. And so they aren't even viewed in the same way as other Muslims. After September 11th, they had a news conference of all the imams here in Philadelphia, for example. And there was one Libyan imam, Amin al-Arabi, and all of the African-American imams, and me. And so they said, where are the Arabs? We want the Arabs! And they were screaming like that, we don't want to hear any of you other people. We're not interested. And as for me, as a Euro-American Muslim, they don't even look at me as a Muslim. they see me as a white. So when I go to something like the Foreign Policy Research Institute or some other ultra-conservative or conservative venues, and people find out I'm not only a Muslim, but I preach in the mosque even, and they find, well, you know, that's a little strange. They scratch their heads maybe, and then they try to convince me of their position. In other words, they don't berate me and yell at me. And
They try to reason with you more because they figure you're...
Yes. And so the thing is constructed like that very carefully, and it has this inevitable racial dimension because everything is refracted through race here.
I think I've heard this. I know when I talked to Dawood Walid, he's with CARE Michigan, he mentioned that I think 40% of American Muslims are black. And that tends to get lost.
Well, because they all assume we're in the Nation of Islam.
Absolutely.
Which is not, not an indictment on what anybody is affiliated with, but it's just true. They make these assumptions about who we are and what we do, and so for them, we're not, even worth
we're not
having
authentic
the conversation.
enough. We're not authentic Muslims. Me as an African American Muslim woman, I got all sorts of problems. They see me and they're just like confused. So they don't. Oh, she works too. Something's going on here. She can't be a real Muslim, So as African Americans, again, in Philadelphia, you're in a very unique space where the larger population of Muslims that are here within the Philadelphia County specifically are African American Muslims. There's no big deal to see a Muslim woman driving a SEPTA bus. There's no big deal seeing Muslims going here or going there, going about their business, doing regular everyday things that every other American does. But in those particular environments where there are forums and there are, like you said, press conferences, and someone like me shows up and they're like, well, she has to be a Farrakhan follower. And I have to explain to them, no, I am African American Muslim. I have always practiced Orthodox Islam, and they are completely confused because to them, like I said, I'm just some black girl with some rag on her head. That's how they see it. I'm not an authentic Muslim. I'm some sort of morphed kind of almost like some sort of cancer type of Muslim, I'm not really the real deal, No,
I get that, Jacob.
My own experience about going out into the community and speaking, which I do many times a month as in my capacity as executive director of CARE, is that when I go particularly to churches and synagogues and I tell people, I work for a Muslim organization, if it's in a synagogue, many times half the group gets up and leaves right away. So because you're working for the enemy. And how can there be any sort of symbiosis or relationship between Jews and Muslims? And then I tell them that for at least 1,000 years, the language of the Jewish people around the world was Arabic. It wasn't Hebrew, it wasn't Yiddish, it wasn't Ladino, it wasn't English, it was Arabic. Because 95% of the world's Jews lived and found refuge in the Ummah, in the Muslim world. And there's so much ignorance that I find, and that, I've been called a traitor to my own community, a self-hating Jew, Nazi lover, any number of insults because of my decision, which I thank myself every day for making that decision to come work in Philadelphia for CARE and for the Muslim community. It's been an amazing experience, and I hope that I've been able to change people's opinion about what it means to be in close contact with the Muslim community. And I think I have been able to open up many people's minds in the Christian and Jewish community about what the Muslim community is really like and what Islam is, and how great a gift it is to the human race.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think it all comes down to who are you interviewing? Who are your guests? You should have, when you have your next story, don't run to the same masjid that you've been going to every time, good or bad, a story comes up that is related to Islam or Muslims. Go and see Dr. Blankenship. Go and see Jacob. Go and see people who are in the community who have all these different perspectives, right? There's no part of the world that you can go to and not find a Muslim. That means there is an almost infinite amount of perspectives that you could pull from if you take the time, if you make the effort. So as journalists, we need to start making the effort again. Journalism has, it used to be this thing where it was just the facts, right? And now it's a bigger business. There's all these advertisers, all this stuff you have to worry about. But for me, and I think part of what I've enjoyed working in a more, I'm in a regional market, not a national market at the moment. I think what I've enjoyed about that is I feel like I can connect better with my viewers. When I was at one of the big cable networks, you can't do that. It's just that opportunity is not there. And the reason why I say do that is because what they end up doing on the national level is they pick up the stuff from the locals, right? Where we have what all the journalists here know, but for those who are not journalists, we have what are called affiliate relationships with the CNNs and the Foxes and the MSNBCs. And what they do is we exchange material locally, nationally, and we exchange material. So if you're putting together a very unique piece here with very unique, with the kind of personalities that are not seen all the time, your piece is now going to, could easily go national, which allows now a larger audience to really understand who these people are and what is really true. But if we keep running to the same sources all the time, nothing's going to change.
I just wanted to make one point also. What would also help the journalists is if the Muslim community was also better prepared. A lot of the times I get the phone call, or Lee, I need to speak to an imam, and there's already somebody out there that should not be speaking. Right. I respect leadership. In Islam, we have, very detailed rules and regulations and boundaries about how to respect our leadership and all of those things. But because you are a Hafiz of Quran doesn't mean you should be speaking to the media. So, and that's where I come in, where I have to literally grab someone off and say, listen, you cannot say that. You will not say that today.
Right. Because you can't then blame a journalist for, if you're the person who was put out there, or you put yourself out there and said, yes, I represent this masjid, or this, or this community group, and then you can't be upset with the journalist for using the soundbite that you gave them. Can they be edited sometimes? Yes. But you are responsible for the things that come out of your mouth. And
it runs into a situation with us where at times we're thinking, if this is all we've got to go with,
right.
we got to go with it. I'm going to hand it over to Fatia, but remember, those of you who are following us and following this right now, you're on social media, obviously Twitter. You want to get in on the conversation? Use the hashtag PABJMITM. That's PABJMITM. I'll hand it back off to Fatia.
And I'm glad you brought up rhetoric, because we're going to see a clip here and get into our friend Donald Trump.
Maybe not. A November poll found that 56% of Americans think that Islam is at odds with American values, which is leading to what some Muslim American leaders say is an uptick in hate crimes. This week, a severed pig's head was left at a mosque in Philadelphia. And that follows death threats, vandalisms, and shooting reports at other American mosques. A representative from the Council on American Islamic Relations told CNN after the backlash from the Paris attacks, "I have never seen it like this, not even after 9/11. This inflammatory rhetoric is playing into ISIS's hands. Many see the anti-Muslim rhetoric as counterproductive, as it alienates Muslims in the West, exactly what ISIS wants. In his Oval Office address this week, Obama said that this is not a war on Islam, and that is upsetting conservatives.
In his entire remarks, he never once used the...
So we're gonna, before we get into Donald Trump, Dr. Blankenship, when do you think, or did Islamophobia start exactly at 9/11, or in your research, when did that happen?
Well, it has roots in medieval times, and that is well documented because of the struggle between the Muslim caliphate and some of the Christian kingdoms in the early Middle Ages, which in fact was the subject of my research in my book about the Umayyad dynasty that ruled in the 7th and 8th centuries. And that's been a very long time ago. But it left some traces because people were identified according to their religions, and so that the Christian world then was against the Muslim world and so on to some extent. Although we have to not exaggerate the extent that they were opposed to each other, because there was also a lot of cooperation and exchange and so at the same time. But sometimes it goes back to defamations that occurred then. This all, however, kind of faded because of the Europeans' colonial occupation of the world and the complete lack of credibility of Islam as a threat of any kind that occurred in the 18th and 19th centuries and on into the 20th century. And of course, people who abuse Islam as being a threatening thing have to ask themselves why it was not threatening previously, and why it just suddenly appears to be it made it a threat now. And also, the faction of people who were trying to manufacture Islamophobia were certainly well at work before September 11th. And this occurred during the Iranian Revolution in 1979, and it represented a kind of shift in politics from nationalistic politics towards politics in the name of Islam in some of the Muslim countries that began in the 70s and then continued on after that. So that is the time at which modern Islamophobia got more going.
The presidential hopefuls, Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, have called for the surveillance of Muslims. And Donald Trump said during his campaign, and I quote, "Our country cannot be the victim of horrendous attacks by people that believe jihad." That's what he said, for people that believe in jihad. Again, Dr. Blankenship and Jacob as well, how have you come in the experience of jihad? What is it, if you can explain to our journalist here? Is it a holy war that the media claims it to be?
Well, the idea of jihad would best be translated as a concept of just war. It is parallel to the concept of just war in the Catholic Church and its teaching. And in fact, I even wrote an article on this called Parity of Concept of Just War in Islam and Christianity. And it goes back to times of old where there needed to be some kind of moral justifications for warfare. So it involves then an attempt to curtail warfare, actually, and by putting some rules out there for it. Unfortunately, in both the Christian and the Muslim world in the old days, these rules did not have an accompanying enforcement mechanism, and so consequently, they weren't necessarily observed by the countries themselves, that is, by the polities that were ruled by tyrannical rulers who were carrying on wars in those days. So I think if we conceive of it as a concept of just or justified war, that would be a better thing. Now, of course, that's the war jihad, but the concept also includes what is called the greater jihad, the jihad al-akbar, which is the struggle of the person to overcome their own soul. In other words, to overcome their own greed and selfishness and egotism and so on. That is considered the greater jihad. So jihad means struggle, and it's the struggle of all Muslims then to achieve excellence in God's path, however that may be. Therefore, it's not admissible to call for Islam to eliminate jihad, because it cannot do that. It's embedded in the religion as too basic of a teaching.
Jacob?
When the media and people within the media talk about jihad, it reminds me also how similar that is to when they use the word Sharia, not knowing anything about the structure of Islamic jurisprudence, the numerous schools of thought within Islam and the interpretation of Islamic law, but they pick upon certain words, elevate that into the popular vocabulary, and use that again as a way to attack the Muslim community and the faith of Islam. In the same way, there are people who go onto campus and invent terms like Islamofascism, as if there was any connection between the two. And it reminds me again of the last century, when many people in the establishment, in the Christian WASP establishment, used the term Judeo-Jewish Bolshevism and connected the Jewish immigrants to terrorism and to revolution in the same way that people such as the two candidates for president you mentioned are trying to connect all Muslim immigrants to terrorism and to bringing down the United States.
I wanted to add to that, just
Sure.
as both of their comments, what you see is that the media, or those portrayed in the media, those particular interviews, those particular candidates, what they tend to do is use language to scare people. I remember when President Obama was in his first campaign for president, and of course he has been raised all over the world. You know, he's this child of international love. And what you'll find is that they use the word madrasa to scare people. It was, he went to a madrasa. It's a school. It's not that deep, you know. So I mean, he went to a madrasa where kids learn how to be jihadists. And I was watching this clip, and I'm like, this can't be right. This can't be allowed. And what they tend to use is those words: Sharia, madrasa, jihad, Islamofascism, Islamist, whatever that is, to scare people, and it's working.
Radical Islamic terrorism being the thing that was driving
Oh,
Trump,
absolutely.
and especially Cruz and Marco Rubio nuts as well, was that particular phrase.
Well, what's odd about Cruz is that he might have had some support if he actually did his research, because as Muslims, we have some very conservative views that may match some of the Republican views. You understand what I'm saying? In certain aspects. And if they would get over the hate, they might be able to embrace the Islamic population, you know, but it's all about hate. We have some very particular family values. We believe in certain gender roles and things of that sort. So those are things that are a foundation of their platform. And if they truly believe that, and it wasn't like Dr. Blankenship said, backed up by hateful racism and things of that sort, they might find some allies.
Donald Trump said in an interview, and I mean, of all the interesting things that Donald Trump has said, he said flatly, Islam hates America.
Consider the source.
I know considering the source.
Right. Didn't he say that it's also in the Quran that
he would probably have gotten there.
He tends to make those
he
things
tends
up.
to make those things up, but he says this flatly,
Right.
but that speaks to people. And you mentioned the media, and we've taken our slings and arrows as a whole, for playing a role in his rise here. When he's allowed to say these things, and at least I've seen people attempt to challenge him, but it's met kind of sheepishly. We don't go out of our way, and I'm saying this to criticize my own industry. We haven't made as much noise when people say things like that. How can that be, I guess, as media members? Tell us what we need to do to get this right.
You simply state, you allow everybody, we have freedom of speech in this country, right? You allow it, and that doesn't mean there won't be repercussions. However, there is freedom of speech in this country, and that's great. But what you need to do is then allow him to say what he needs to say, let it be out there, because the voters need to know this is what that man thinks. If we never put any of his sound bites out there, you might vote for him. You might believe he actually is a brilliant businessman, yeah. And so you might actually believe that, and then if that is in fact the case, so we have to put the sound bites out there, but then our responsibility as journalists is to then, if we know the truth, speak the truth. See something, say something, all that good stuff, right? We then need to speak, we then need to inform. It's not about our opinion, it is about what is actually the case. No one is asking you to put your opinion out there. This is what Trump said, fine. This is what whomever said, it doesn't matter, the Pope, anybody. And when you know that is incorrect, we simply need to state the truth. But we can't do that if we're not doing our homework to know more about, and in this particular case, to know more about Islam and Muslims and what we believe.
I want us to touch on the women and Islam, women's portrayal in Islam. If we remember back in Northeast Philadelphia, there was a string of robberies where a man dressed in a niqab or a burqa were seen on tape as suspects. And I remember you can always find the state of America by reading the comment section of many articles online. And I saw things like,
as best I possibly can.
Right, I saw things like hashtag ban the burqa, hashtag Muslim women are oppressed, they don't need to wear those napkins on their heads, very hateful things. And I think that plays into the notion that all Muslim women wear black, all Muslim women wear a niqab or a burqa, or sometimes they're being forced to do that. Aaliyah, are you being forced? You know, do we need to get you some help or some assistance? Zakia, could you please speak to those things?
Not forced to do too much of anything. Well, my experience with hijab has been, you know, I'm 30-something, I'm not going to say exactly, but it's been over 30 years that I've been dressed like this. And not until very recently did people feel comfortable really addressing it. And one of the things I tell other sisters, and I get questions constantly, Facebook, Instagram, Muslim women, young Muslim women, I'm talking about 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, inbox me and say, you know, I've seen you around, you seem really confident. What can, you know, I have this job interview. Do you think I should wear my kimar? Yes, you should, because they're going to find out you Muslim either way, you know, but when you play into that fear, you know, if it's your choice, it's a commandment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is in the Quran. If you choose not to do that, that's between you and Allah. But what you should not do, excuse me, what you should not do is allow outside forces to make that decision for you. Discrimination exists, it does. And I probably have lost out on particular jobs because I walked in looking like this. But I can tell you that there are other jobs that I was hired for because my resume spoke for me. You know, once, as Ikea said, you know, there's that initial shock when you come into the room and they go, oh. Right. Like, oh, okay, I knew she was a woman. Right. Aaliyah doesn't really sound too black, you know. So I'm a black woman in this burqa thing going on. But once I begin to speak and I know what I'm talking about and they're looking at my qualifications, businesses want to make money. So they need not concern themselves with all of this because I can make them the money. That's number one. The advice that I give to young women is you really have to make the choice really early on and stick with it. We have to be consistent. You have to be prepared to say, I may lose some battles, you know, but this is what I've chosen to do. Hijab is so not just a Muslim thing, which is some more information that people need to know. It did not start with Islam. Christian women, the Virgin Mary, all of these, you know, shrines to her, she is veiled. You know, so this thing about, you know, covering your head, you should assimilate. I had a woman tell me, don't you want to assimilate? I said, assimilate to what? What am I assimilating to? I'm an American. This is what it is. So what you have to do is really just be solid in your decision. Like I said, years ago, people really wouldn't bother with it. Nowadays, people kind of got this keyboard coverage, you know, to send you emails, take that nappy thing off your head, or, you know, whatever it is. Or people, you know, say things to you in the aisle of the supermarket or what have you. But I'm just a different type of woman. What did you say? And they keep it moving. You can't appear to be weak. You can't appear to be weak. You have to really, what they would say, stand your ground.
And I want to get Zakia in on this.
I recognize that Aaliyah and I talk from a slightly different space than some of our sisters, because we have immigrant sisters who come here and this is their first time trying to enter the workforce, and it can be, they're just unsure. So I think it's a valid question, and I think I understand that there is the concern. Like, I'm with Aaliyah, I've never taken off my kimar for a job interview, and would never, because if it's for me, I'm gonna have it. If it's not for me, then okay, it's fine. However, and I'm gonna go back to the editorial side of that. In your newsrooms, you do not have, we still don't have a lot of Muslims in the newsrooms. And I think that if you don't, like we said before here, call someone that you know and simply ask the question about what is the material that you're covering your hair with. I want to make sure I'm saying it right. Journalists, it is okay to ask the questions. You know, we're nosy anyway. It's okay. That's what we do. We want information, but ask those questions too, because they are important. If I see something in a script, I correct it, not because I feel like it's a personal attack on me, because I realize that they really don't know. Some journalists really don't know. They think they know they've heard it somewhere, they're not really sure, but I assure you, call me. It's fine. I'll answer any question that you might have in regards to your reporting to Muslims and Islam, and I will certainly direct you to someone else who can give you a better answer if I can't. But I think that the portrayal of women is, I think that we have to, as journalists, if it doesn't seem right, then it probably isn't right, and we need to go with that journalistic gut and figure out what the truth is. All these women, these millions of women around the world can't all be oppressed. So, just consider simple common sense things like that when you're covering and you're talking about Muslim women in the media.
And again, to match that, we in the community have to be open. We have to be open to answer those questions. In this state, in this country, we can't afford to be shy, really, about this. We have to communicate the information. To me, I have like this very pet peeve about the word hijab being misused and things of that sort. So when it is misused, I'll shoot off an email to someone and say, this is really how it's supposed to be used, and this is what it encompasses, or what have you. We really have to be open to it. We can't afford to shy away from those questions, because they're going to go with what they think they know, as Zakiya said.
What can journalists do to build a better connection with the Islamic community? I know you said it can call you, but what else can they do? Are there some sites? Are there some links? Is there something out there?
You know what? There are. There's so many things that we can do, but I'll say this: one thing we can do is start pronouncing the terms correctly. I mean, every time I come home and my mother's like, they call us Muslims again, and like she said, they use madrasa like it's an evil little educational center, and start using the terms correctly. We really do. I know that you came through and Soledad. Let me fall back from the names. I know that journalists that have been around for a long time have said it this way. I have come into that so many times where I'm like, yeah, that you're just not saying it right. That's incorrect. It is simply incorrect. Show the community respect. It's like respect is a two-way street, right? So show the community respect. That will allow them to relax, because they're thinking, at least we're making an effort to be more accurate, right? We're journalists. I know it sounds really idealistic, but if we're going to do this and we're going to continue to do this, let's do it right. There's no reason for you still to be calling somebody Muhammad and all these other crazy pronunciations that you're just making up and you stuck with, but it doesn't make it right. We use a lot of terms to describe people in a lot of ways throughout history. It wasn't necessarily correct, and at some point we have to do away with the inaccuracies. That little thing, I think, would go over huge with the Muslim community.
I see Jacob.
Any journalist who is worth their salary knows where to go and find information. Yeah. I don't think that we can help them, but I think the level grade F that we have given national media is not due to ignorance. It's due to willful misrepresentation of what Islam and the Muslim community is all about. In the same way that a decade ago, certain media outlets, and I name specifically the New York Times, knew that Judith Miller was handing them false information about the weapons of mass destruction and yellow cake uranium, and they put it on the front page. And afterwards, after the war was over and thousands of Iraqis and American soldiers lost their lives for a lie, a friend of mine who works at the New York Times called me up and said, you know what? We have blood on our hands because we purposely did not look far enough, and we let false information be plastered on the front page of the most prestigious newspaper in the world. And that rallied people to support the war and to sign off on Bush's declaration that he was going to war to look for these weapons of mass destruction.
And I thank you for that last comment. We're going to wrap up here because I'm sure our audience is itching for questions.
I just wanted to ask, in terms of accountability, right? So Muslims are stereotyped as people who don't aren't for free speech. However, we always listen to free speech, right? We always listen to the free hate speech on different news media outlets, and we're forced to listen to it. So all of that hate speech definitely has a lot of clout. So I wanted to ask you all, and we played the Al Jazeera AJ Plus English video that holds people accountable. It held Donald Trump accountable, right? So can you think of news outlets that are holding other news media outlets accountable, right? Pointing them out and saying, hey, what you showed was racist, right? What you had, kind of like confronting what's out there, right? Because Muslims are definitely for free speech, and they're forced to always listen to that hate speech. But who's there to hold those news media outlets accountable for showing that racist hate?
I'd like to answer that. I think what you're finding, those small, like you said, news media outlets that primarily use digital media, that get those quick 30-second, 45-second videos. I love those things. They're on Facebook. You see them on your Instagram, that 15 seconds. And those particular mediums are geared towards young people, where they're still forming opinions about everything in life. So I think I don't know them all by name, but I definitely really like AJ Plus. There's like BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed sometimes misses the mark. They have great intentions. They have great intentions, but every now and then they go a little bit left, and I have to raise my hand. TheGrio.com is really good at holding people accountable. So there are a lot of those small agencies that are using social media, using digital media to actually combat those things. And they're winning a lot because this goes with everybody.
Hi, I'm Chinchilla Jonicia, PhillyCAM Voices. And my question is, Ali, I believe you made the comment about how most people automatically link you all to Minister Farrakhan's movement for all Black Muslims. And my question is, how does one differentiate one from the other?
Well, you can't tell by looking.
Right. Yeah.
It's not like, okay, yeah, she's nation, she's wearing blue. You ask.
Yeah.
It's there's always a small percentage of people that's going to be, offended, but the majority of people will be very delighted that you ask and be actually happy to answer your question. So if someone asked me, no, I've never been a part of the Nation of Islam, nor have my parents. I was born and raised as an Orthodox Muslim here in Philadelphia, and usually they go, oh, really? So your real name is Aliyah Kabir? Yes, that's on my birth certificate.